All right, I've muted our guests for tonight. I think there won't be any more feedback for a moment. Hello, everyone. Thanks for making the time to join us this evening. My name is Michael. I'm the events coordinator and publicist at Annie Bloom's Books. For those of you who aren't familiar with the store, we're located in Portland, Oregon, in the heart of Multnomah Village, where we've been around for 43 years now. Admitting another person in. It's great to see so many people. Thank you. We're open on weekdays from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and weekends from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Our website is always open. You can shop day and night at annieblooms.com. I'm going to throw the link in for the event into our chat here because both of the authors' books on there. You can go and pick up both of those right now. We do pick up at the store, various shipping options, delivery in the immediate area, well, in Portland and a little bit beyond. So we really appreciate it if you purchase the authors' books through us. That'd be great. We've got some really good events coming up on Tuesday, March 8th. We've got Philip Margolin, our local mystery thriller author who has had many events at Annie Bloom's. He's going to be here Tuesday, March 8th at 7 p.m. for his new Robin Lockwood mystery, The Darkest Place. And he'll be in conversation with fellow Portland thriller author Dana Haynes. So that should be really good. On Thursday, March 17th, Jeff Wallach, another Portland author, will be reading from his latest novel, Everyone Here Is From Somewhere Else. He's the author of Mr. Wizard, and this is a new standalone story which continues the tale of middle-aged brothers Philip and Spencer Elliott, who undertake a quest inspired by their late mother to discover wonderful things. There's lots of golfing involved, I believe. And on Tuesday, March 22nd at 5 p.m., a little bit earlier, Mark McDonald, who's a Portlander, will be here with his sister, Rachel Elliott, who's on the East Coast. Mark discovered later in life that he had this whole family that gave him up for adoption and that he was fully related to them. And it's co-written with his sister and sounds like a really cool story. Love and Genetics is that one. Tonight, we are with Portland author Ann Stinson and her new book, The Ground at My Feet, Sustaining a Family and a Forest. Ann is joined by Idaho author Louise Wagenknecht, whose new book is Shadows on the Klamath, A Woman in the Woods. Both of those titles are published by Oregon State University Press. There'll be a Q&A at the end, so feel free to type questions into the chat and I'll be happy to read those to the authors, or you can click on the little hand icon that's in the reactions menu down there at the bottom of the screen. And if you dare to get on screen live and ask a question. Let me see. Anne is having some technical difficulties. Apparently that was the, oh, because there's two of you. Yes, that makes sense. Let's see. Interesting question, Anne. I am not sure how to figure that out, but maybe I can get rid of this person. Omit this person. Let's see. I think we can remove. So that's the right Ann Stinson that I'm removing. And you're still here, so I think I have removed Ann's double and we'll no longer be getting echo. Let's unmute Ann and see what happens here. And Louise.
Perfect, yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Cool. Let me tell you about Ann's book, The Ground at My Feet. Ann Stinson grew up on her family's tree farm in southwestern Washington state on a ridge above the Cowlitz River. After building a life in New York and Portland, she returned home at the age of 50 when her brother's death from cancer left her manager and co-owner of 300 acres planted in Douglas fir, western red cedar, and ponderosa pine. The Ground at My Feet is a memoir about loss and grief, as well as a portrait of a family, a region, and an industry. Let me admit another person here. Combining personal story and research, Stinson weaves essays, poems, history, and science into a rich and layered account of life in a family forest in the Pacific Northwest. She maps interactions between the land and its people over 2 centuries, the Cowlitz peoples, homesteaders, and several generations of logging families who have worked the property. She follows her family's logs as they become lumber for fence boards in suburban homes, touring a local cedar mill and traveling with her father to visit mills in Japan. Stinson adds a landowner's voice to conversations about the human tendency to demand more of the land than it can sustain. With its uniquely personal view of the Pacific Northwest's timber and forestry heritage, The Ground at My Feet is an engaging addition to the literature of the landscape and ecology of the West. Ann Stinson grew up near Toledo, Washington. After high school, her interests took her to Japan, New York City, and Portland, Oregon. She earned a BA in English from Western University and an MA in East Asian Languages and Culture from Columbia University. A former school teacher, she is president of the Family Forest Foundation and is on the board of the Washington Farm Forestry Association. Now let me let in another person and then tell you about Shadows on the Klamath. In 1973, Louise Wagenknecht was just another college graduate, but unlike many, she wanted to go home, back to the Klamath Mountains where she was raised. When a job offer from the Klamath National Forest gave her that choice, she jumped on it. She landed in the logging town of Happy Camp, where she'd spent part of her childhood, as chronicled in her previous memoirs, White Poplar, Black Locust, and Light on the Devils, sorry. With Shadows on the Klamath, Louise Wagenknecht completes her trilogy about life in remote northwestern California. In this new work, she recounts her years in the Forest Service, starting as a clerical worker in the Klamath National Forest before moving to a field position where she did everything from planting trees to fighting fires. Her story is about a Forest Service in transition as forest management practices began to shift. Not least among these changes was the presence of women in the ranks, a change that many in the Forest Service resisted. Wagenknecht blends the personal and professional to describe land management in the West and the people who do it, their friendships, rivalries, and rural communities. Anyone with an interest in the Klamath-Siskiyou region or the history of women in natural resource agencies, or the many issues associated with industrial forestry, should read this book for its valuable firsthand perspective. General readers interested in the rural West and personal memoir will also be richly rewarded. Let's add a different Ann right now. Louise Wagenknecht was born in Boise, Idaho, and raised near the Klamath River in northwestern California. She graduated from California State University, Chico, with a degree in English and studied range, botany, forestry, and wildlife management at Humboldt State University. She worked for the U.S. Forest Service for more than 30 years and has been widely anthologized. She lives in Idaho. Welcome, Ann and Louise.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think I was going to go first and ask Ann some questions.
Yes.
Mind went blank there for a minute. First of all, thank you very much, Michael, and thank you very much to Annie Blooms, which is a wonderful bookstore. I was there almost 20 years ago, but it looks wonderful now. Well, yeah, and welcome, Ann. It's been wonderful getting acquainted with you over the last
Great fun. I know.
week or so.
We could talk for days and hours. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, the wonder of Zoom. But your first chapter, when I started reading your book, your first chapter is such a wonderful evocation of the links among place and family and living in a forest. I was wondering if you could read us a bit about how you came to form this relationship with your family's land near the Cowlitz River.
Sure. So this is from the very first part of my book, and it just gives a little rundown of how we got to where we are. My family moved to this land in 1972 when I was 9. We've lived in Seattle for 2 years prior, and I invited my best friend from those days to the tree farm. We had just logged along the country road that bisects our farm, and I ducked my friend's head down in the car so she wouldn't see the stumps. Where did this instinct come from? How did I know at 9 that city people looking at a cutover only see destruction? Logging is a link in the chain that brings natural renewable resources out of the woods and into public, often urban space. It's almost as if this handoff from rural people who tend and harvest to urban people who purchase and consume is secret and silent. It ought to be a celebration, a merging of peoples, and acknowledgement and appreciation of gifts. When I first moved back to the Northwest after years in New York City, I dated a man who couldn't understand why we cut our trees. His view was shaped by the timber wars of the 1980s and 90s, a time marked by the overcutting of forests throughout the Pacific Northwest. I was excited to show him how a forest could be sustainably managed. But even after months of walks in stands of various ages, even after witnessing my family's demonstrative love for the land, the man thought we should never cut another tree. Language is part of the problem. We don't have a good name for our land. Non-industrial private forest is too bulky and tells what we are more than what we are. Timberland conjures up lumberjacks or shoes worn by hipsters. Tree farm makes people think of Christmas trees. The woods is what Dad says when he's going out to mulch, tube, or thin, but it's not really a name. Forest conjures up a park, untouched nature, but when was natural?
Oh, yeah, that's really interesting. It reminds me of a fellow my husband used to cut firewood with. He referred going to cut firewood as going to the timber.
Yes, yeah,
Yes.
exactly, yeah.
Do you think that when we name our places or even our small part of a larger place, does that help to personalize it for us?
Yeah, I think that having a name for our place helps just mutual comprehension. You know, just, I mean, I think a name can also obscure, you know, a tree farm, people don't understand, forests don't understand, but if we can have a mutual understanding of what it is, then that can really help. But we also have named different parcels around here. We've got Two Snags, Snag Patch, we have, you know, Gemini Grove, the island, you know, we've named different parts. And I think that does make another layer of meaning when we're going out there. We used to have just numbers, you know, T1, T2, T7, but none of us could remember. We'd always have to look at the map, you know, and so now when we have those names, we know what we're talking about. So it works better.
Yeah, I love that about your book, that you would take a place that was only a few acres and call it, you know, the Gemini Grove. And
right, yeah,
I thought that was wonderful. I think maybe was wondering, maybe that helps us to take better care of things.
I think so. I think so. Now, I mean, people call it intensive management, what we do. You know, I mean, we just planted 9,000 trees. We had a planting crew plant those trees, but we planted half of that was cedar, and cedar, the deer love them. So we have to put tubes around each of those trees. And so we're doing that. And so we have 4,000 tubes out there. And so that means that every time we go out, we're gonna have to move those tubes up as the trees grow.
Oh,
yeah. So,
yeah.
you know, I mean, it's just a ton of work, but it's soul giving work. It's a wonderful thing to be doing. So.
Oh. No, that's no, that brings back memories.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure, yes.
Yeah, we didn't often tube trees. We did it once in a while, but yeah, I know how much work that is.
You know, people just
So,
don't plant cedar because it's too hard, but
yeah,
not us.
yeah, yeah. Well, I was intrigued also in the book by your description of your mother's life and her artwork, and how she used her sculpture, her learning to do sculpture, to memorialize the loss of her son, Steve. And I was wondering if you could read us something about that.
Sure. So my mom was a musician for all my growing up years. She played organ in the Episcopal church. And then at 60, she started clay, which gives me hope because I started writing at 55. So, you know. In the months after Steve's death, Mom made a vessel she calls a pieta. The pieta in Mom's case has two eyes, but otherwise no human features. No obvious mother and dead body. It is a vessel holding a vessel, a round body with a long, thin arm holding a smaller open cup. A long, slender neck rises above the round body. On a May afternoon, we sit in the carport at the farm, next to the blue door leading to the freezer, the sauna, the canned goods, and the half racks of beer. Blue Moon for Mom, Bridgeport IPA for Dad. One of the first sunny days of the year, it's glorious. Dandelions and heather and lilacs and tulips are in full force, and rosebuds already single summer. Mom sits in her customary chair on her blue cushion. It's the chair she sits in to smoke her Marlboro Lights, to follow the Blazers games, play words with friends on her phone, monitor the progression of the seasons, and watch the birds. Next to her on a wooden box sits 2 glass jars. One holds a lighter, a notepad, and a pen for an occasional haiku. Wads of silver paper, cigarette pack linings, fill the other jar, waiting for an art project. I sit on the concrete, my feet in the gravel. She tisks and says, "A man once told me sitting on concrete is bad for your parts." I sit anyway. Mom tells me the Pieta was inspired by the turtle goddess of Myrtos. The Greek figure with the pitcher in the arm seems to be a parallel to the central concept of a traditional Pieta, the mother holding the dying Jesus. I mean, this figure is cradling a pitcher in her arm. In my thinking, it symbolizes the dead child. Religion, such as Christianity, provides a vocabulary, an iconography to express things that are difficult to express. Mom often says that when she works with clay, her mind is free, and working with clay has enhanced her relationship with music. She realized her music had been just note by note. It had no heart. I was just interested in making sure that I played the right note with the right rhythm. After clay, a spiritual quality began to infuse my musical performances. We walked to her clay studio just across the driveway to see the image she used for the model for her Pieta. In her tie-dyed socks and garden shoes, she crosses the room to a file drawer I've never noticed. Old file folders lie piled in the drawer, reused but not relabeled. The old labels read, current correspondence, Enron, art clippings, Modigliani, all contain art clippings. I smile as I realize that Mom, whose house files are tidily organized, allows herself disorder here. From a file near the top, Mom pulls out a goddess image of Myrtos. It is on a paper square cut from a computer printout advertising the goddess pilgrimage. Mom's printer tray is often full of once used sheets, and she's printed the turtle goddess on the back of a logging receipt from March 6, 2014. It records 2 loads of logs from Baldwin Logging, totaling 9,430 feet. I asked her what drew her back to this image when Steve was dying. She says she made a few before based on some by Picasso and then sighs. I don't know. The answer to your questions are visceral. They slip my brain. I can't articulate it. How about the Lord led me? I laugh out loud. I push a little more and ask what feelings she had when making the Pieta. She tells me, I felt unsure. Well, erase that. If I'd been in my head, I would have wondered if people would think if it's a fitting tribute, but I wasn't. It was just my gut. My gut doesn't give a shit what people think.
That is wonderful. I also loved a place where your mother said she is steeped in Christianity and she rejects it.
Yes.
These stories about your parents, they're such independent thinkers, and it leads me to wonder, what were their parents like? What were your grandparents like?
Both my grandmothers were school teachers, and both of them then, they'd gotten a 2-year degree to teach in the 30s, and then had to go back to school to get their 4-year degree to continue teaching, and both of them did that. My mom's mom was a reader. I mean, she was a book of the month club, she got Pearl S. Buck's book when it came out, I mean, she read what was happening. My other grandma, I think, read some. I remember her giving me a book by Corrie ten Boom. She was a more religious person. But both of them lived pretty conventional lives. It was my mom who, she left the panhandle of Texas at 25, went to Ketchikan. Dad was already there in the Forest Service. But then the League of Women Voters, I mean, Women's Lib hit mom hard, and that affected dad, and they've rolled with it. I mean, it's amazing that their relationship evolved from a, late 1950s, early 60s strict man-wife relationship to mother would argue, but to an equal, a relationship of equals. Yeah, no, but I think they both are independent thinkers for sure.
Yeah, that really comes through.
Yeah.
And that's not, anyway, I just think that's very neat.
Yeah, no, I feel lucky. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, another trip or another episode with you and your father, where you take a trip with your father to Japan and Korea to basically check out what's going on with your logs. And I thought that was great. I really loved that. It was fascinating on a technical level, especially the part about the Japanese milling operations. And I was wondering if you could read us some of your description of that.
Sure. So this is in a town near Hiroshima, and it's one of the biggest Douglas fir mills in Japan. Port Blakely Company helped us get there. At ground level, we walk between the rows of logs. They stand 30 feet high and create a narrow corridor. Dad touches the round ends. Beautiful logs. Look at this ring count. See how the small knot size is? No sweep, tight grain. All the best logs from our land end up here. Taka drives us to the next mill. As we walk in, we pass stacks of wood labeled Miyazaki home, 3rd floor, Tanaka home, 2nd floor. The lumber here is cut to specification for individual houses. Machines glue smaller pieces of wood into large beams, strong Douglas fir on the outside, lightweight Japanese cedar on the inside, making sturdy light supports. Workers in another area operate machines that cut notches in the lumber. The end product begins to resemble Lego parts. The mill manufactures enough lumber for about 700 houses a month. In cavernous concrete and steel buildings, I watch the logs being sliced and diced, rolled along conveyor belts, stacked, tested for strength and moisture, dipped in an antibacterial solution, sanded and glued. The whine of saws and the sucking sound of hydraulic pumps hurts my ears. The sharp metal flaying the flesh of the trees hurts my heart. Concrete covers the earth. Green steel blocks the sky. Industrial fans blow hot air and suck sawdust. Workers operate machinery, rarely touching the wood. I can find beauty in logging, in slash burning, in stumps, but this leaves me cold. I want to go back to the days of hand-hewn boards, but then I feel silly, like a disconnected urbanite wanting small batch, artisan, single-sourced products that just by their non-industrial origin are available only to people with wealth.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, it's been so much fun to learn about a different aspect of the world of timber, coming as I do out of the government agency.
Right. Yeah.
I didn't get to see as much of the small independent operators.
You have to come out.
Yes, I very much would like to. Yeah. What would you like readers to take away from the ground at my feet?
Yeah. So I've been thinking about that. I think I want the city folks to know that wood is good. Everything that comes from trees is biodegradable. As you grow the tree, the animals can eat and the fresh water flows and the trees are scrubbing the air. I would like tree farmers to tell their story. I really would like other people that love their land to start writing down things and help communicate what we do. And I would like writers to play with form. I think one of the things I like about my book is it's not all straightforward prose. There's some poetry, some lists, some block chunks of text. And I would like to read more books like that. So, I mean, there's a lot out there, but so I guess those are my 3 different audiences, perhaps.
Yes. Yeah, your book and the different forms you use, yeah, they gave me some ideas about, hey, let your imagination run wild.
Yeah.
Let's it's truly wonderful in my opinion.
Well, thank you very much. All right, let's talk about your books. I was so excited. I have to say, I brought the first one home. I think it was this one. So Louise has 3 books, a trilogy, like Michael was saying. And I brought this one home and I read it. And then immediately mom and dad read it. And dad's like, I need to write a letter to Louise. So I contacted, this is before this was all set up, OSU Press. And I said, my dad wants to contact Louise. And they're like, we can't give out contact information, of course. But anyway, now we can. So it's good. Now that I've finished all 3, I can give them up. But
all right.
Yes. So the one we're going to talk about today is Shadows on the Klamath. And it's the last one. Like Michael said, the other ones are earlier in Louise's life. And this one deals with her 30-year career with the Forest Service. And I have to say, as I was reading it, it's a beautifully written, appreciative of nature, inclusive of personal anecdote book. But I shared Louise's frustration with the way that the Forest Service did its business, particularly in the later years. And there's just one passage that I thought perhaps you could read about the way that the Forest Service sort of lost their way in the late 70s and 80s.
Oh, yeah, that's, thank you. That's from a chapter called The Red Queen's Race, which I begin with a quote from Lewis Carroll.
Love your quotes.
Yeah, who wrote, "Now here you see, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. If you want to get somewhere else, you must run twice as fast." And let's see. The Forest Service initially didn't understand that building roads into inventoried roadless areas would become so contentious. When environmental groups began to fight the roads program with appeals and court challenges, they learned that the Forest Service often did not fully comply with either NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, or NIFMA, the National Forest Management Act, the most important laws regulating timber sales. If the agency obeyed one and confessed in an environmental analysis the effects of all that it planned to do, the project could often be shown not to be in accord with the other, and vice versa. Alice called me one day at the office. "Come up here for dinner tomorrow evening," she said. "Bring a big salad." I dug out my biggest stainless steel bowl and wrote out a shopping list. One of the perks, or the hazards, depending on your point of view, of being a friend of the district ranger's wife was helping to feed the guest when she had to entertain. This time, the forest supervisor and an assortment of officials from the regional office in San Francisco were in town. We gathered on Alice's porch on a summer evening while the guests admired her antiques and listened to the evening breeze roar down Elk Creek and through the boughs of the massive Douglas fir on the lawn. We drank beer, ate Alice's company dinner specialty, chimichangas, and met the honchos from the Bay Area, who looked ecstatic to be out in the field. As the light fell away and the mosquitoes came out, I paused between trips to refill the chip bowls to listen to a conversation between Forest Supervisor Bob Rice and Bill Jones, one of my bosses. Bill was shouting at Bob, repeating himself under the influence of strong emotion and several beers. "We can't do it, we can't do it," Bill yelled. And as I tuned into the exchange, I realized that he was talking about the difficulty of doing any kind of spray project these days. He also pleaded to get the roadless areas removed from the Klamath timber inventory so we could justify lowering the annual cut. Bob sipped at his highball, ice clinking in the glass. "Well," he said calmly, looking over the top of Bill's head, "you'll just have to do it, is all." Bill wasn't appeased. We can't," he said. And then to my astonishment, he began jumping up and down. His 5 feet, 10 inches, no match for Bob's 6'4" when it came to making eye contact. At that point, Alice yelled out that hot grease was coming through, and they retreated to the living room, where Bill shifted his pleas to one of the regional people, and Bob leaned on a door jamb and started talking to George about fishing. Bill was right, and Bob knew that Bill was right. But Bob also knew that the situation was out of his control and out of even the regional forester's control. No decision on lowering the Klamath's output would ever be made by either of them. Eventually, something would constrain the supply, but until then, plans for logging in roadless areas continued, and the annual timber targets remained unchanged. The only way to meet them was to enter the roadless areas, or try to.
Yeah, I think another thing about in this book, it makes it clear that they had to keep logging because their budget was based on the amount of logging that was done the prior year. And even though they knew that it wasn't sustainable, they kept on doing it anyway.
Yes.
And that's just, anyway, it makes my head hurt. But I mean, it's typical, I think, of any large organization, public or private, that just gets, they just get too big and too, the people at the top don't let the people at the bottom make any of the decisions. I don't know. What advice do you have for the Forest Service as they go forward?
Yeah, there was an awful lot of bureaucratic inertia involved. The Forest Service has, if I were to give them one piece of advice, I would say the Forest Service has a tendency to hit upon the next new thing and stick with it far too long. In the 1960s, that was clear cutting. You know, clear cutting was the way to go. It was industrial scale logging that was easily transferable from one Western forest to the other. It was something that everybody learned, and it got out the cut.
Right.
And the problem was even long after the scientific evidence was, hey, this isn't really good, and you're getting a lot of effects that aren't good, that are really not good. Road building causing erosion on steep slopes, and hurting salmon streams to everything from, the wildlife effects,
Right.
the bad effects on wildlife.
Yeah.
And what I'm afraid is they finally got away from that, kind of by force.
Right.
And
Yeah.
they had to back up and kind of do things differently. But what I'm kind of afraid of now is that now, instead of clear cutting, the buzzword has become forest restoration. And all too often that turns out to mean a blanket prescription that everything needs to be thinned. And whereas what you really need to be doing is looking at things on an extremely local basis.
Right. Right.
And yeah.
No, I think that's good advice. I mean, I think that's good advice for a lot of things, but particularly forests, for sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Both of our books intertwine sort of facts and history of the industry with personal anecdotes. I love yours. They made me laugh. Your dry sense of humor, and just sort of your off to the side look at the world, I thought was pretty interesting. I was wondering if you could read the one about your post-divorce dating life. We both have stories about post-divorce dating in our book, so if anybody wants to think about that anyway.
Yeah, post-divorce dating. Yes,
so much fun.
Okay, let's see. Let's see, and this is at this point. Yeah, it's about 1980, 81. When I first started working in the silviculture department as a forestry technician, I was one of the few women working in the field. But in the next couple of years, that kind of changed. We started getting quite a few women who were field going. It starts out here. Many of the new women on the district, Laura among them, had arrived with boyfriends already in tow. I had few illusions about my looks, but I'd certainly never broken any mirrors when I was fixed up a bit. I began to go to parties, to show up for pickup soccer games, to drink beer with the rest of the crowd when someone got a promotion. I enjoyed talking to these new people in my life, outside of work as well as in. They weren't people with whom my ex-husband would have socialized. They smoked weed, played hacky sack, and didn't want to hang out with the line officers. Eventually, I went out on dates that no one wanted to call dates anymore. Whatever they were, I was old enough not to expect an evening or even sex to lead to anything more, no matter how entertaining the experience. Permanence wasn't part of the deal in the 1980s, but I knew myself for a hopeless serial monogamist. One man at a time had always been more than enough complication for me. Some of these encounters turned out to be quite useful. One young man taught me how to install linoleum on the living room floor when I moved into the larger of the two cabins I had inherited from the divorce. Another helped me muscle a stove inside and hook up the stovepipe. A third had a sauna where naked women were always welcome and a freezer full of ice cream. And if none of us became the love of each other's life, that was fine, for we knew enough not to utter the fatal words to spring the ultimate trap. When I stopped seeing them or they me, no one's heart was broken.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good. How do you think the personal anecdotes affect your book? Why include them?
Well, I hope they make it more interesting and kind of help the reader understand what was happening to the people in both the community and the Forest Service. It was an era of immense social change.
Right. Yeah.
And the Forest Service employees and their social lives, it was all intertwined with what was going on in the woods.
Right. Yeah.
And I guess also I come from the belief that memoirs aren't journalism. They're the writer in the story and the reader.
Yes. Yeah.
They should know what's happening to the writer at the time.
Right.
This is how I felt. This is what I said.
Mhm.
And so I come at memoir from both a personal and a professional level, at least in this book. In my
all
previous books.
three of your books have quite a lot of personal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I obviously am a fan of the braided, the braided memoir, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. No, it's fascinating to learn facts as well as learn about the personal life as well.
Yeah. Well, I think so, and I hope the readers think so.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
But back to the woods. In the last several years, fires, big forest fires, catastrophic fires have become, we just dread them every fall. And I'm wondering if you could read a little bit about how you see the fires changing. I mean, you've seen a lot of forest fires in your work, but they've changed in the last decade or so. If you could read about that.
Yeah. This is actually from the last chapter, but in the 21st century, a series of droughts set the stage for massive forest fires. My frame of reference for big fires was 1987, when fires burned for months over both logged and unlogged, roaded and unroaded lands. So I didn't buy a connection between lack of logging and big fires. But for many, especially after 2010, as fuel moisture ratings reached new lows, fuel loads in tons per acre became a worry in the inland West. On the coast, with its rain and fog, no one cared about ladder fuels or big chunks of wood on the forest floor. The Happy Camp complex began in August 2014 near Frying Pan Ridge. Wind from the west drove the fire upriver, primed by record heat in Happy Camp that summer, over 5 degrees above average in July. The fire crossed Grider Ridge, followed the river corridor, and tore up through the Walker Creek drainage, reburning all of the 1987 fire footprint and then some, and more severely. Lake Mountain Lookout was wrapped in foil once more. The fire headed east to leap the Scott River and even jump the Klamath at one point before the autumn rains at last slowed it down. 3 years later, scars of salvage logging stretched for miles across the river from Syed Valley and up into the Walker Creek drainage. I read the NEPA documents for this West Side Fire Recovery Project and learned that at least a few lessons had been learned since 1987. Although the prescription was still to log and replant, the advice was to leave space next to green hardwoods, to mimic natural groupings of trees, and aim for a sharply reduced number of trees per acre compared to our old 8x8 plantings. There is, said the final environmental impact statement, no intention to create densely stocked plantations of continuous fuels. And most remarkably, to someone with my memories, growth of existing hardwoods will be encouraged. Hardwoods will be included in the target stocking for units in areas where they exist. Somehow, that prediction from 3 decades ago, it is impossible to bring a plantation to rotation age on the Klamath before it burns up, had survived and made its way into institutional memory. Some of the big new fires were not wind-driven. Although they covered tens of thousands of acres, they often burned in a mosaic pattern that left patches of green, cleared out the understory, and probably did more good than harm. Dead trees are havens for woodpeckers and other wildlife, and some plant species need severe fires to reproduce. But their sheer size was like nothing anyone had ever seen before, and they were part of a procession. The Panther Fire, 2008, Beaver and Happy Camp Complex, 2014, Gap, 2016, Abney and Eclipse Complex, 2017, Natchez, 2018. This was not the old Klamath. Even knowing this, I was startled by the stark words of a scientific article, quote, "In the Klamath, the influence of a reduction in severe fire during the Little Ice Age, or a period of frequent but lower severity fire in 1700 to 1900, may have increased the dominance of conifer forests. That legacy may increase the vulnerability to higher fire activity today in a remarkably warmer climate," unquote. The article went on to conclude that much of the Klamath ecoregion seems likely to revert under the pressures of heat and drought and fire to a shrubland hardwood ecosystem in which conifers will no longer dominate. Forget the future. The Klamath is already out of balance with the present, a situation known as disequilibrium.
Oh, it's tragic.
It is.
Yeah. So I'll ask you the same question. What do you want people to come away with after reading this book?
Yeah, I'd like them to have a sense of what the Klamath country is like, and what it was like to live and work there in the 1970s and 1980s, and how the land and the river and the isolation and this rather motley group of people who all found themselves there at the same time, how that affected what they did and how they related to the land. You know, in the end, we were all people together at a certain place in a certain time. And some of us, like myself, had a connection to the land before, and some of us didn't. But I think in some way, nobody who came to the Happy Camp District got away without it affecting them.
Right.
A lot.
Someone who read my book, they said that the land is almost a protagonist.
Yes.
And I think it's the same with your books as well.
Yes.
The land is a player.
Yeah, it's I think looking back on it, I think what I write about is place. And a rather certain place. At least up to now.
Yeah. Good. All right. So I think we open it up to questions. I think Michael is running that part.
Yeah, I got a direct message question from Michael Head to me, so I'll ask that for Anne. I was struck by the way Anne's language and sentences and the telling of her story conveys with immediacy a movement from loss and depression to joy and embrace of the job that was intended for her brother. Can Anne talk about the process of writing and how that reflected her personal growth after the difficult time of her brother's passing?
Yeah. So I started writing, I went to art camp with my mother. Behind me is part of her art collection. And she does clay. I took writing class because I'm not a visual artist. And I guess maybe it was the second summer that I went, my brother was really sick. And so I wrote about it. And I mean, that I had no intention of writing a book. That wasn't what was happening at all. But as I kept writing, I realized that there was something to be said. And then I think as I started taking on the responsibilities that my brother had at the tree farm. My dad is here. He is the expert on all the land and knowledge. He's a forester. I'm not. But I started asking thousands and thousands of questions, and I started writing them down. And I just had my notebook everywhere. And I realized that other people might want to know about it too. But writing the book gave me another layer of curiosity of learning what I was doing. And so that was really fun. It also gave me an excuse to talk to the loggers and the planters and the mill workers. It wasn't just for me, it was for the book that I was writing. So that it was a helpful, not ruse because it's true, but it helped me get in with people that I wanted to talk to.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I think Darren was the first to raise yellow hand over here. Darren, do you have a question?
Hey, so my name is Darren McCrae. I'm a member of the Colville Confederated Tribes in Eastern Washington State. You guys might want to write this down. The Department of Interior, it's a Bureau of Indian Affairs. Well, one of the 13 federal agencies getting ready to do the NCA 5 is the Department of Interior. They had the BIA part of them reach out to the Institute of Tribal Environmental Professionals and ask them if they'd reach out to Indian country and see if we're seeing things other people aren't. I'm one of 90 authors that they just published in this report. The name of this report is Status of Tribes and Climate Change.
Wow.
And so and the Intertribal Timber Council just published my observations in the largest forestry magazine on the West Coast, which is the Western Forester covering Oregon, Washington, and Alaska. Andy Perleyberg, a professor from WSU, is the one that invited me here today. I've got a letter of support from him, as well as a letter of support from Greg, his last name's Greg Edel. He's a professor at the University of Washington, backing up what I gotta say also. Guys, this is hard. This is hard for you to take, but I just told you all the people that are supporting me. All of our trees are dead. And here's the reason why. Pre-industrial revolution, our CO2 sat at 280 parts per million. Today it's at 420. That's about 260 years. In 260 years, we've increased our CO2 by 50%. If you Google what does elevated levels of CO2 do to vegetation, it will tell you it forces it to grow at an accelerated rate. But for something to be able to sustain it, try to sustain itself using that type of energy to grow that way, they need additional nutrients and water, which is not there. There's been one area that, excuse me, I found somebody talking the way I'm talking. And they're half right and they're half wrong. It's the U.S. Forestry Service out of Idaho did a story with the local news station where I'm at. And they titled that article 16 million acres of dead trees. They say there's a swath of dead trees coming from Montana into Idaho that's dead, but don't look dead. There's no insects, there's no mass dead foliage. No dead tops, they say, but it's dead. And a pro can look in there and not see anything wrong with that. They're attributing that to an invasive species called blight rot. And they are saying that it's rotting the roots out. I'm saying it's impossible for a disease to travel 16 million acres through a forest and not show a rate of decline. So if you go look at that, article, my
Yeah,
observation.
I think we got that today. I that magazine on our table. Yeah,
My observations begin on page 60.
okay, I'll look it up.
Thanks,
And-
Darren.
I'll
Yes.
definitely look it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so can I share a little more with you guys, or?
We've got a few more people who have their hands raised and just a few minutes more left in our
Right on.
allotted time here. So
Right on. Well, let me give you my email address. If you guys are interested, I have a lot of information to share, as well as one more thing I'll leave you with. If you Google, the bottom has just dropped out. One of the major newspapers here in Eastern Washington put me on the front page of one of their Sunday papers when I told them all the insects have disappeared around the nightlights. What that I noticed in 2019 and 2020, they went out to try to prove me wrong. My observations are irrefutable, so they published them. And one, here's some support for me. The May 2020 issue of National Geographic. There's a bunch of insects on the cover. Caption says you're going to miss these. And the article said we lost 70% from 1990 to 2016. That's 26 years. That's 6 years ago. There's pretty much no insects out there. I'm working with Indian country right now to try to, well, thank you for your time.
thanks, Darren. Yeah, you can put your email in the chat if you want for them to, or you can message them.
My hands are a little shaky. Could you put that in? It's Darren, DARREN at the letter C, the letter O, the number 2, MUCH.net. Darren at co2much.net.
Got it. Okay. There it is.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Right
Darren.
on. Thanks, guys.
And Melissa, I think you're next.
So first, I wanted to thank both of you. Ann, I'm only 25 pages into your book. I actually put it down after you buried this beautiful dog. And I just want to say, I support the personal and the information. And Louise, I read your book, Light on the Devils, a long time ago, and I loved it. So I'm looking forward to this one.
Thank you.
I just want to ask you a question about writing, because you said that writers were one of your audiences, and you already spoke to this a little bit, and you said that you were curious about some things. And I find that many people who write start out with a curiosity. So my question is, how has writing your book, Louise, and your book, Ann, changed you? Maybe what curiosity was answered? You talked a little bit about that, but were there surprises when you finished? Did you look back and think anything, how did you feel when you were done?
Louise, do you want to go?
Well, I think I started writing initially, especially with the first book, to try to figure out what the heck was going on in the little company-owned lumber town I lived in with my family. Just what was happening, and I did manage to figure, I think, quite a bit of it out, and I think that's kind of been part of my process, is to start out by saying to myself, what happened? What was going on?
Mm-hmm.
And I learned that by writing down what happened.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, and also I think for me, if I'm actively writing, I observe more. I'm more curious. Even now, if I have an idea for a poem or something, my brain is always working. Like today, Dad and I were out putting some mat around some fir trees that we planted in canary grass, which is horrible stuff. And so we're trying to protect them. And there's some little alder leaves that are just, only the veins are left. And I think they're so beautiful. And
Mhm.
then when I look at my old hands and I see all the veins, I think it's ugly. And I'm like, well, that's not fair, but I thought, that might be a good poem, but
Mhm.
I think if I weren't writing, I wouldn't be thinking that.
Mhm.
The other thing I think about writing about this land here is, we've been here for 50 years. And now that I've written stories about it, if I'm in a particular place that I wrote about in the book and I'm back there again, the whole story that I put in the book is
Mhm.
in me,
Yeah.
and in a way that it wouldn't have been if I hadn't written it.
Yeah.
It becomes like a storage place.
Yeah, no, it's
That's
pretty,
really great.
yeah.
Thank
yeah.
you.
Yeah,
Melissa?
that is so true. That's something I've noticed too.
Mhm.
And Marissa.
Hi. I just wanted to make a little observation about Miss Ann's book. I just wanted to thank you for just your very vivid descriptions about like smelling the earth and dirt. And I know that sounds weird, but I just felt this visceral connection to like being in a place. And I've been to your family's tree farm. I was there when you married your husband, Tom. And I also wanted to thank you for how you described your relationship with your brother, and then just the journey that you kind of took. You just felt like you were right next to you throughout the whole book. And I know that there were some black and white pictures of Steve, but I just thought that like he could be on our Zoom call tonight.
Oh.
Oh my God.
Because truly, like, this book made me feel more connected to him, and I got to know him in such a different way. And he was so connected to the land, and just how we would always bring your family and stuff together. It was just fantastic. And I loved how you had your poetry in there. I kind of felt like I was reading like a personal journal that you had or something.
Mm.
And anytime I go places, I can like feel the air and I smell the dirt now. So
Good.
and I also love the coffee mug that said
Sawdust is man glitter.
glitter. That was really great. But anyway, thank you for an awesome evening, everyone. This was great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marissa. Lovely observations.
Yeah. Yeah, that reminded me of, I forget who said it, but someone said, all good literature is about loss or the recollection of loss.
Mm, yeah.
All right, well, we're just a few minutes over, so I think sounds like a good time to wrap it up. And thank everyone so much for coming here tonight. For those of you who weren't able to make it, this is being recorded, so it'll be on our YouTube channel in the next hour or so you can let people know to look for it there. There's a link on our webpage to our YouTube channel, so people can go check it out there later. Thank you so much, everyone, again, and we hope to see you again. And don't forget to buy your books at Annie Bloom's. We'd really appreciate it. Thanks, Ann, and thanks,
Local
Louise.
bookstores. Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much.
All right.
Right. Bye-bye, everyone.